Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd.
On today's episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Palestinian scholar Dr. Dalal Iriqat. Dr. Dalal is an associate professor of diplomacy at Arab American University in Palestine and a columnist for Al Quds newspaper. She's an expert in conflict resolution, international relations, and public diplomacy, and plays a significant role in shaping discussions on Palestinian sovereignty and development. Dr. Dalal's insights are highly valued in academic circles and international media, where she champions educational and diplomatic strategies to advance sustainable peace. A special thank you to Mohamed Atayam for connecting me to Dr. Dalal. Dr. Dalal, thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and honor to be with you.
So, one of your favorite quotes, Socrates, if I'm not mistaken, we cannot teach anybody anything. We can only make them think. Hopefully today that's what we do. But if you're okay with it, if you indulge me, we're going to teach just a little bit about you. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
So you were born in Jerusalem, correct?
Yes.
Can you describe your experience growing up as a Palestinian in an occupied territory?
Yes, I was born in Jerusalem, yet I'm not allowed to go into Jerusalem today. Although it says on my ID, on my passport, that I was born in Jerusalem. Unless I obtain a permit from the Israeli authorities, unless I get security clearances, unless I prove that there is a reason to go to Jerusalem, I wouldn't be able to get that permit. However, since October, even for any justified reason, no West Banker is allowed to go into Jerusalem. So that's basically how I can describe my life as a Palestinian, as a Jerusalemite born a Palestinian. Let alone, of course, moving from any Palestinian city to another or between Palestinian villages, not only due to the Israeli military checkpoints that are planted between every junction, but yet the real terrorism today is the rising settler terror that is spread all over the West Bank, with the number of settlers rising to more than 750,000 settlers who are attacking Palestinian vehicles and, property, housing, and civilians all around the West Bank.
So I just want to explain to the audience, when you were going to school early on at childhood age, what was that experience like, seeing that, sort of watching everything happen?
Well, I grew up in Jericho, which was relatively a quiet, peaceful city. Up until recently, actually, 2 years ago, that the Israeli military occupation forces started to impose deadly closures on the city of Jericho. Not because there is any threat coming from Jericho, but they realized that the Palestinians have resorted to Jericho as an escape place for some peace and some, Zen weekends, especially those Palestinians with Israeli citizenship who have the money to invest in weekend houses in Jericho. And with the trade and commerce realities intensifying and increasing, the Israeli authorities had started imposing those closures and depriving the Palestinians from that basic right of mobility, hence hindering any, commercial activity or, even those people who, doctors, nurses, teachers, or students who would commute, for example, or would need to commute, were not able to commute. So every now and then you would see more imposed checkpoints, more imposed non-justified and closures that could just pop up anytime that would hinder the mobility and the right of every Palestinian. I grew up in Jericho. I went to schools in Jericho until I graduated high school. But like any other Palestinian, life under occupation is totally abnormal. It's the basic definition of a human being living and not being able to plan anything in your life ahead. Not even plan a weekend with your family, not even plan a worshiping trip to Jerusalem or an educational trip for your students, in any historical or cultural site. It is basically a right of the life of resilience, under the Israeli military occupation. That's how we grow as Palestinians, where we face the military occupation as a reality. And I want to be clear with your audience here. It's not that we get adapted to the Israeli military occupation and that we are normalizing with it. It's just that we know it exists and we want to counter it by our resilience and by our continued, education, our continued activity, our continued work towards serving Palestine and the Palestinian cause and our right to struggle under occupation.
So you mean Sumud?
Sumud, exactly. I salute you for choosing the name for your podcast. It's exactly Sumud. And you know what? I always tell my peers and the Palestinians who are still living here on the ground, on the soil of Palestine, that by only choosing to reside in Palestine, to stay here, this is Sumud by itself. This is the utmost resilience. So we don't really need to resort to armed struggle, for example, or to the different tools of resistance. It's basically that the fact that we chose to remain here while having the opportunity to live away or to live somewhere else is basically a really a nice way of Sumud that Palestinians give back to their country, their cause. That's why I always urge the young people who get the chance to go and learn and join university, whether in the US, in Europe, or anywhere around the world, to get the education necessary that they need in this world, to get exposed to different networks and to make connections. But I always try to encourage them to come back to Palestine. Unlike any other country in the world, like countries usually give back to their people. In Palestine, it is the fact that being Palestinian is a blessing, but we need to absorb and to understand in order for us to believe that we as individuals were born for a reason to serve our nationalistic cause by living here in Palestine.
And your form of resistance really is through education, through your writings, through your lectures. But I have to ask, as you were growing up, obviously you grew up in a unique household. We'll talk about your father a little bit, hopefully, if you're okay with that. But what inspired you as a young child to learn and to read? Because obviously you don't just end up getting a PhD. You build towards it. So can you kind of walk me through that?
Sure. Well, as we just described, growing up in Palestine is not just a normal way of upbringing for humanity in 21st century. So yes, I grew up in a unique house with very responsible parents who were dedicated to raise the generation of tomorrow, the generation of the 21st century, where we are also globalized citizens, where we are very focused on our education, because we treat education as a strategy, as a tool for, a way out of the military occupation that we were born into. So growing up in the household of Dalal Iriqat was proudly my father, of course, was very, very inspiring and was very challenging at the same time. My father was a very devoted man, was a workaholic, and, a very, very Palestinian, not only in rhetoric, but also by action. He chose to live in Palestine, although he was an American citizen. And, most of the family actually resides in the US today, but he chose to remain in Palestine because he believed that he had a mission and that he had a responsibility, an ethical responsibility towards the Palestinian cause to serve and to give back to our country. And that's how I was raised. I was raised that first education is the best and most important tool, and that we were born for a reason to serve Palestine. And this is somehow, this explains my attachment to Palestine and to the cause. I chose education, I chose diplomacy, and I chose writings, my weekly columns. And I also chose to target the younger audience by my writings through using simplistic political language, because I realized that there is not enough political awareness among the younger generations in Palestine. I don't know why, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. However, our educational system does not, graduate the Palestinians from high school with that deep background or deep knowledge on history, on the Palestinian cause, etc., etc. So if it's not on the personal level of every individual to educate themselves, it would be hard to really learn history and reality. Let alone, of course, today's, trends of social media and of people being, more accustomed to visuals rather than, to reading, etc., etc. People don't want really to spend more time on more sophisticated readings or, papers, etc. They want more faster audios or visuals. So yes, I grew up in this house that was very devoted to education, to reading, and to bringing up children who were proud to be Palestinian and who believed in their individual and collective role in serving Palestine.
And I would be remiss not to state that being a woman leader, an academic in Palestine, is a whole nother level of challenge. Would that be fair to say?
It is indeed. It is indeed. As I said, occupation is one part. Giving the colonial structures of it and stereotypings of women's roles, etc., etc. But also our culture. Yeah, I mean, I'm not ashamed to share that we live in a patriarchal culture where unfortunately women's roles are somehow stereotyped. So to be a strong woman, to say the least, or to be leading in academia, in writings, and in political analysis is not something that our society is used to. I did face a lot of challenges and resistance, yet my determination is stronger. And I try to also inspire the younger girls and the younger women by building different networks, by encouraging my own students. And for that reason, I registered in Palestine the Business and Professional Women Network, where I'm trying to bring together the powerful women, the empowered women, the strong women who are experts in different fields, like whether from academia, architecture, politics, arts, music, genetics, or medicine or law, because I believe that when we come together, our impact will definitely be much larger and much more impactful.
You did plan a summit, if I'm not mistaken, but that was shut down by the Israeli government, correct?
We did plan the first Palestinian Women Summit last March 2023, and that was the first Palestinian Women Summit. And this year we were supposed to hold the second Palestinian Women Summit in parallel with March the 8th, to commemorate the International Women's Day. We did kick off our first meeting in preparation for the summit in Gaza on the weekend of the 19th of September. But unfortunately, with the genocide unfolding in Gaza and the war crimes that have been documented, we didn't have the guts, neither the morale to continue. Let alone that many women who were part of this effort have lost their lives and have lost their enterprises and their work and their families. So it was just not okay and not realistic to continue with that mission. So yes, it is the Israeli military occupation that hindered the possibility of holding this summit this year.
Yeah, I mean, the scariest thing is powerful Palestinian women standing up for each other, right? That's pretty scary to them. Yeah, for sure. So I do want to just jump in a little bit to your education. So you achieved you got your bachelor's in Jordan, if I'm not mistaken, master's in London, and then your PhD in France. Those are very unique situations to get an education as a Palestinian. Can you just kind of walk through your experience as a Palestinian in those systems and learning?
I did my BA in Jordan, as you said, and I scored high in the high school system, which is very, very competitive. And it's very much conventional in the way of learning, I must admit. It required a lot of, reading and memorizing, which is, not the very contemporary or, creative way of, encouraging analytical or critical skills. So when I went to Jordan, the system was very similar to the Palestinian system of education, so it was okay. But then when I started to apply for my master's, And because of the financial, of course, situation, I was also hoping to find a scholarship. And my academic gradings helped me secure a scholarship through the university itself, which valued my academic performance. However, the challenge was not very easy, because not only because of the language, because English language and learning was one challenge, but also the methods and the approaches of learning, where we had to deal with the more entrepreneurial or more high-tech tools, and in presentations, in more skills of learning, rather than memorizing and the conventional way of teaching. Yet the challenge was competitive, but it was also inspiring and motivating for a Palestinian who believed in education as a tool for a way out of the occupation and of the daunting political reality that we lived in. I managed to graduate with distinction from London, and I did a research that was very focused on negotiations and mediation, and I applied the theory of coercive diplomacy into the phase of negotiations up until the year 2000, where everybody talks, for example, about Camp David II, and everybody, the U.S. administration, Clinton himself, he wrote and he blamed Arafat for, the collapse of the final status issues of negotiations that took place in Camp David. Well, I took it upon myself to do that investigation and research, and I did interview all of the negotiators, the Palestinians, the Israelis, and the Americans, to find out, with scientific and data documentation, that it was not really the Palestinians to blame.
It wasn't actually just, I don't want to cut you off, but there's a misnomer out there, the suggestion that your father was to blame, which is not true at all, correct?
It's not a personal thing against one individual. Yasser Arafat was actually, the leader for the PLO, and he was the decision maker. But also he was not the one to blame. There were many lack of the correct information, and there was many, distorted realities about Camp David. There was no written proposal to start with for Camp David. When you learn about the details of, for example, discussing the rights of the Palestinian sovereignty under on top of the Dome of the Rock, but not underneath it. When you learn about the details of the Wailing Wall versus the Western Wall, when you hear about the details of, granting the Palestinians some sovereignty over certain quarters of Jerusalem, but not the rest, and not underneath. This, you get to understand what happened. And then when you learn about the secret channels that took place before Camp David, and how, the Sharon's visit to Al-Aqsa Mosque in September that year did really ruin any prospect for any peaceful or two-state solution. Yet also on the American side, Clinton was actually leaving the White House, and he wanted to leave the White House with a legacy for him, contributing or doing something in the Middle East. That is for a fact. That's why he tried to rush things and to take the Palestinian and Israeli negotiators to Taba, etc., etc. However, he was rushing things, and he was not really, introducing or mediating or bringing the parties into a common ground that is based on legitimate rights of the Palestinians, which were anchored on the basis of where the peace process started 30 years ago, which is basically the Palestinian right to self-determination and the Palestinian embedded rights according to the UN resolutions. For example, the right for the refugees of return and compensation, the Palestinians' right to land, to sovereignty, to self-determination, to mobility, to statehood, to liberty, to freedom, to dignity, which are basic rights for the Palestinians, where we as Palestinians have found ourselves, for example, negotiating the details of a checkpoint here or there, or an ID here or there, where I strongly believe today, after my research, that the American biased mediation role did serve the best interest of the Israeli side by shattering us in the details rather than focusing on a more macro approach. Had we been really more focused on bringing about peace and security to the Middle East and the two people alike.
Coercive diplomacy. Can you define that for the audience? If you don't mind putting your teacher hat on just for a minute.
Yes, I will, of course. Diplomacy, to start with diplomacy is not, just to be soft. because there is somehow confusion and misunderstanding of the use of diplomacy. Diplomacy is basically, using the non-violent tools to conduct international relations. It doesn't mean to be soft in any way. On the contrary, we are supposed to be using the sticks that can be, digital sticks that can be, more coercive. And that's basically coercive diplomacy, where some parties actually get to their interests and to their needs and to their desired aspirations by using more sticks rather than carrots. It's very coercive diplomacy in the theory of diplomacy is very similar to when we say the approach of carrot and stick in political science. However, in coercive diplomacy, the parties tend to use much more sticks than carrots. And this is exactly what the American parties, the American role, the American administrations have been doing when it came to the Middle East peace process in dealing with the Palestinians. The Palestinians were not treated as an equal party at the negotiating table, but rather they were coerced by the American administration, with the different American administrations. The Palestinians were always coerced. For example, at Camp David, when Arafat did not accept, the sovereignty just over the dome of the mosque and not beneath it, and he told, the Clinton bluntly, he told him, I would invite you to my funeral, because this would bluntly mean that I am giving up the Muslims' right in Jerusalem, not only the Palestinians' rights on the land. So immediately Clinton told him, if you say no, if you refuse this proposal, then I don't guarantee you that any wavering of the Palestinian representation office will be renewed in Washington, that no wavering on the American embassy in Tel Aviv that would be moved to Jerusalem. And this is an important fact that we need to discuss, because we were under the impression when Trump came to office that it was Trump's invention to decide to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, yet ridding the Palestinians any rights of self-determination or being a nation that deserved a mutual diplomatic representation, and by closing down the American consulate in Jerusalem. Yet that was inspired by the American administrations way before Trump. And that was the coercive diplomacy that Clinton practiced against Arafat. So, and if we look at many different other examples, for example, if we look at the tax money today that is being, is stuck at the Israeli side, it's basically a coercive diplomacy tactic that Israel has been using against the Palestinians. If you don't do that, okay, then we will shut the money and we will confiscate your tax money, which was an Oslo procedure that the Israelis actually collect the tax money, which is a right for the Palestinian people. It's not something that we should be negotiating or wasting our time over negotiations. If you look at the more issues of electricity, of fuel, energy, water, the Palestinians up until this moment are totally dependent on the Israelis in those basic, natural resources, where we as Palestinians are not allowed to even dig wells or invest in Area Cs or, practice or enjoy our basic rights when it comes to natural resources or the exclusive economic zones that are, embedded in international law. Yet it is, upon the Israeli side to decide whether we get those services or not. And this is, again, part of the coercive diplomacy that was orchestrated since the Oslo Accords and with the Paris protocols of economic relations.
Yeah. So, I remember watching a video recently, actually. I think it was obviously an old video, but of Hillary Clinton basically saying Arafat messed up the whole thing. He had a chance. So how do we fix that narrative? Obviously, many of us are being silenced. Obviously, there's a huge PR machine against us. But how do we fix that narrative? How do we get the truth out there?
Listen, let me share with you a difficult fact and reality that we must admit to as Palestinians. We need to confess and we need to admit that we have not been very successful in exporting our narrative on behalf of ourselves. For decades we have failed. For decades, many other players have been exporting and sending out narratives on our behalf, to the point where, unfortunately, we became to be seen as always, the poor the beggars for money, because we asked for donations and, the donor community to help us. We were labeled as, violent or terrorists just because we threw stones at the Israeli military occupation. So the stereotypings or the images or the narratives which were shared with the world on our behalf were totally wrong. However, the Israeli side was very successful in exporting that image. And, we have to mention the Israeli Hasbara machine here. The Hasbara machine, which is basically, the public media machine that is very well invested on the Israeli side, and that is run and, very centered at the Prime Minister's office in Israel, and that is very well connected on all the cabinet and the ministerial offices in the Israeli system, where everything is, strategized communication is orchestrated, and they strategically communicate with the world. They adopt the same narrative, and then they export it all around. We have a long way to go, and because the Israelis were very successful, and with the help of the biased Western media, if I may say, the narratives which were exported by the Israeli Hasbara machine were very successful in spinning the realities, in distorting the facts, and in introducing the Palestinians in a way that is really far away from reality. That is an obligation. That is a duty and a responsibility, ethically driven on every Palestinian and on every conscious person who believes that justice must prevail, that the Palestinians have a just cause, that where our rights must be shared, and that our narrative should be told to the world. We have all witnessed how Western media selects, picks and selects what to share and what not to share, and what to hide and what to communicate, to the point where, unfortunately, the basic role of media, which is investigation, journalists and media, theoretically speaking, when people go into journalism, they learn how to carry out investigations and then report based on facts. But today, all we see is, journalists sharing mere opinions or advocating for certain opinions that are, not anchored in inquiry or in documentation or well referenced. So our duty is difficult because we had reached a point where the world was misled. The world was very, very misled. And, sometimes we reached a point where we are exhausted. For somebody like me who keeps, briefing delegations, who keeps lecturing sometimes or trying to raise awareness or write, I get exhausted sometimes of repeating myself over and over again. Yet, I realize that I don't have any other option but to continue. And that is my message to anybody who believes in justice, who believes in humanity, who believes in the Palestinian cause, and for the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and to liberation, freedom and dignity, to not to tire and not to give up, and to believe that as long as there are people who speak justice, who speak law, who speak logic, logic must prevail at the end, no matter how successful the Israeli side has been for so long. And it's upon ourselves not to let anybody, export that narrative on our behalf.
So is that the same message you would give to the Palestinian diaspora, for example, in the U.S.? What should we be doing different? What should we be getting better at? Because as you know, and I've documented this many times, we've been afraid for many years. We've been programmed not to speak up. But now we are going to speak up. And if we do, how should we do it?
Listen, if there is anybody who is scared to speak up, or who had been shadow banned or silenced, it's mostly the Palestinians who live under the Israeli military occupation. And allow me to share with your audience, that the Israelis had passed the Terror Act in 2016, but this past year they had passed the Facebook Act. Facebook Act, under the umbrella of Terror Act, would mean criminalizing anybody who would speak up or be vocal on behalf of the Palestinians' rights on Facebook or in social media platforms. So the minute or the moment you dare to speak the reality or to scandalize or to share the truth about the military occupation, about the war crimes of Israel, about documenting the truth and the facts, you get labeled as a terrorist and you get criminalized. Allow me to share the story of the 6 human rights organizations, including Al-Haq or Defense for Children or Damir, who were labeled as being terrorists, not for anything, but because they were the organizations which were very, very respected and which had the reputation for documenting the war crimes that Israel was committing against the Palestinian people. So what did they do in order to, they wage a war against the truth. So, but the message for the Palestinian, or the diaspora, we need to understand that knowledge spreads when people move. So I think the Palestinian diaspora is a treasure for the Palestinian cause that needs to be well invested. For so long, we had failed as Palestinians to come up collectively and to try to positively coordinate our efforts, our expertise, the brains of the Palestinians all around the world. So my message to the diaspora is to never give up and to be vocal and to utilize and capitalize on all the expertise and the networks of the Palestinians. However, the first message that every Palestinian in the diaspora must be convinced of is that the individual responsibility towards the Palestinian cause, and that cannot be achieved only by living abroad. I mean, most of the diaspora, and here I'm not judging and I'm not blaming and I'm not labeling, but everybody has the capacity and has the freedom to fly into Palestine. So please don't waste that opportunity. Come back to Palestine, reside here, buy property here, try to reside for a while here. This is part of the resistance, and that's part of how we can, capitalize on the diaspora, the information sharing, the knowledge sharing, the expertise. There are many Palestinians around the world who are the gurus of academia, of architecture, of medicine, of arts, and design, and we need all those Palestinians to be here on the ground. Palestine is very proud of its people. However, I think we need to come up together and to cooperate more collectively towards our responsibility.
That's powerful. Thank you. That's a great message, really. And I'm glad you're the one who's helping lead this effort for us as well. Just so you know. So everybody, the famous line that I always hear when somebody's discussing the situation in Palestine is "but Hamas, but Hamas, but Hamas." Can you educate the folks that are listening on Hamas, and can they understand that the occupation existed way before Hamas came into play?
So, as I said, we're not here to educate people, but we're here to make them think. It's really important that everybody takes the responsibility of inquiry, and that we don't just take the information that is spread all around the internet and take it for granted. Yes, Hamas exists, but Hamas was created in the late 80s. The Israeli military occupation started in 1948, and the Palestinians' right to self-determination, to struggle under the Israeli military occupation is an embedded right. This is, I think, the basic piece of information that needs to be widely shared. That when the Palestinians rebel against the Israeli military occupation, when the Palestinians struggle and resist against the military occupation, this should not be contested. This is an embedded legitimate right under the UN, resolutions. So, and we should not confuse things between, what Hamas is doing and what the Palestinians have been doing. If we watch the polls recently after October 7th, you would see a more rising of the popularity of Hamas in the West Bank. It's not because the Palestinian people are fans of the ideology of Hamas. On the contrary, I would bet, but we need to explain that people had seen in Hamas the party that had brought back to the Palestinian cause to the surface, that had, led the Palestinian right to resistance, which is, again, a legitimate right under international law. Would we say that Israel had the right to defend itself? If we are anchored in international law and UN resolution and the international system based on equal base, then nobody should be discussing or arguing the Palestinians' rights to defend themselves if we're talking about Article 51 of the UN Charter. Yet, for those who read international law, they also need to explain that the Israeli military occupation is illegal and it must end. that the Israeli settlements are illegal and that they must end. It should not be tolerated that the Israeli military occupation continues for more than 7 decades while the world celebrates the independence of Israel, every May, while Israel is the one and only state that is recognized by the UN without identified borders. So here, I need to explain that the Palestinians are not only calling for the right to self-determination. We are not only calling for our rights for a recognition of a state. We are not only calling for our rights to freedom, liberation, and dignity, but also we're reminding the world who had recognized Israel as a state that they did not define the border of the state of Israel. Those who still advocate for the two-state solution and for, the peaceful ends in the Middle East, that they need to go back to defining that border of Israel if they are serious about the two-state solution. Otherwise, we're fed up with this civilized rhetoric, coming from the Biden administration, saying that they want to impose equal measures of dignity, freedom, prosperity for the two people. And then when we come to reality, we see nothing but the contrary. We only see the more enrichment of the Israeli military occupation. We see more, encouragement of the settler colonial project that has taken all the land. The Palestinian land is shattered. And we don't really see any territorial contiguity for any Palestinian state that is being spoken of. So for those countries who are still advocating for a two-state solution, they can simply recognize the Palestinian state and the Israeli military occupation, and by defining the border of the state of Israel, and that is a package for peace in the Middle East for the Palestinians and the Israelis alike, or they could just simply refrain from that rhetoric of the two-state solution, because on the ground, what we are witnessing is a one-state reality. It's apartheid, that is, for a fact, yet the Israelis are imposing that one-state reality. So if, as an academic of conflict resolution, I want to say, for example, that the two-state solution and argue that it is the best case scenario for the two people to live strategically in sustained peace, what the Israelis are doing on the ground is imposing a one-state reality. And apartheid cannot continue to be sustained. The status quo of an apartheid regime cannot continue in 2024, where our kids and the new generations are, growing up on reading the Declaration of Human Rights, for example, where our kids are growing up to believe that they are equal to any other teenager or human being their age, whether in Tel Aviv, Shanghai, or New York, or France, for example. This is the basic definition of humanity if we want to look at human beings as equals.
Yeah. So we know then it's impossible to have a two-state solution without clearly defining the borders. But where does that leave us? They're not going to define the borders. So does that mean essentially that the two-state solution is off the table and it has to be a one-state solution? Does the U.S., do the other Arab countries even want a two-state solution?
Up until this moment, and right after October, the talk had been intensified over the two-state solution. It had been intensified. And, with the talk of a mega deal in the Middle East, a normalization deal, bringing together Saudi Arabia and Israel, this tells me that there is an opportunity for resumption of, the talks of peace. However, the message is the Palestinians have been waiting and working and devoted to that peace track and to diplomacy and to negotiations for more than 3 decades. For more than 30 years, we were promised, by our leadership, by the PLO who had signed the peace agreements with Israel, that we will be granted, those basic equal rights of being a human, our right to self-determination, our state, that we will get rid of the occupation, that we will get rid of apartheid, racism. What we witness on the ground, any Palestinian on daily basis, is more checkpoints, more settler terrorism, more confiscation of lands, more settlements that had eaten all the land, more extrajudicial killings, more entrenched Israeli military occupation, more, racist policies, more deprivation of basic rights, more division between the Palestinian communities. Hence, the message is we still want peace, but we want to live in dignity and freedom. So the world and the international community member states, they cannot continue, to sugarcoat a peace process and, to feed our ears with that civilized rhetoric by talking about those equal measures and peace and two-state solution, while on the ground, all we see is shielding the Israeli military occupation in the international bodies, where we only see more, blunt encouragement of the war crimes and more coverage and more, strategic and financial and military aid to the Israeli military machine that is committing documented war crimes in 2024 against the Palestinian people. Just since October, the fact that the death toll among the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip had mounted over 34,000 Palestinian civilian souls, mostly children and women. And in the West Bank, it had mounted over 470 souls. This should not be tolerated. So that's why we're saying it's not about the shape of the solution. It's not about a one state or two state. It's about trying to repeat same tactics, same strategies, same lines, by simply coercing the Palestinians and trying to fool the Palestinians to expect them to expect different results by using same strategies. This should not be okay. And this should not be tolerated. The Palestinian people have had enough. The Palestinian people are, basically and very simply asking for a dignified life. But to tolerate more racism and more deprivation of basic rights, more around 9,000 Palestinian civilians are behind Israeli jails today. Many of those are children. The majority of those are administratively detained. Administrative detention is when they don't sue it, when they don't sue the Palestinian, when there is no trial, and the renewal of arrest takes place every 6 months without trial. This is illegal. This only happens in Israel. So those practices by the Israeli military occupation cannot continue while being documented and the whole world is witnessing, while the Palestinian people are expected to remain silent, for example. We get to education again. Yeah, that's why I believe in education as a tool. When we read international law, when we read the basic conventions of the child and the conventions on diplomatic relations and the Genocide Convention and the UN Charter and the different, international law articles, then we are equipped with those civilized, peaceful, legal, contemporary, uncontested tools, which are diplomatic. And this is the basic definition of diplomacy again. That's why I say this is a tool and a weapon that we should not abandon. Diplomacy is a tool in our hands. And, this does not mean abandoning our rights to resistance, because the basic right of resistance against an occupation is embedded diplomatically and peacefully in international law. So when you learn diplomacy and international law, you learn that the Palestinians have a right and the Palestinians have the right to speak. And, being vocal and speaking the truth doesn't mean anything against the Israeli people, doesn't mean anything against the Jewish people. And let me be clear, very, very clear. As a Palestinian who was born in Jerusalem, who grew up in Jericho, who lives in Ramallah right now, who still lives under the Israeli military occupation, who had friends who were martyred, who had a cousin who was martyred and whose body is still kept in the Israeli refrigerator, I say that we don't have anything against the Jewish people. Our problem is not against the Jews of Israel. Our problem is against the Israeli military occupation that is illegal, that is brutal, that needs to end by definition and by international law. But for the Israelis to continue committing war crimes and genocide and, to treat the Palestinians in 2024 by calling them animals and by treating them as non-human, this should not be tolerated by any conscious human being, no matter what our religion, our right, or our ideology is.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it reductive for me to say the following? The Israeli government and their allies, let's just say it that way, just simply don't want Palestinians to exist. They don't want a Palestine to exist.
Definitely yes. What we had seen in Gaza since October is a basic translation of a second Nakba. And it's important that we link this second Nakba not only to the settler colonial project, but also to what started way before, which is the Balfour Declaration. If we read the Balfour Declaration, which is when Balfour, the British, promised the Jews a homeland on Palestine, if you go to Washington, and I urge your listeners and your viewers, when they visit Washington, I urge them to go and visit the Holocaust Museum. Because in the Holocaust Museum, you will see a big map for the Middle East hung on the wall. And on that map, you will see Palestine on the map, not Israel. And this is the mere fact that everybody needs to remember, that Palestine was on the map and that Israel was created on Palestine, and that it is okay and just and simple that we need to bring back Palestine to the map. So the Balfour Declaration came, and in the second paragraph, it bluntly said, it referred to the Palestinians as the non-Jewish communities. Although the Palestinians were the majority, but we were called non-Jewish minorities, who are supposed to be given or granted civil and religious rights. Whereas the Palestinians then were the majority of the population on the ground. However, what the Israeli military occupation, the Israeli colonial project had been doing is an ongoing settler colonial project by annexing more and more land, by confiscating more and more land, gradually but systematically, for the best interest of building more and more settlements, and where we had seen more forced displacement orders, forced evictions orders that had been ongoing. Not only in the first Nakba of 1948, where 530 villages were expelled and the people were forced to leave, and that's how the Palestinian diaspora was created, by the Palestinian refugees being forced to leave their homes and property and to go all around the world. In Gaza, in the first week after October, when we saw the military orders of evictions from the north to below Wadi Gaza to the south, that is a translation of forced eviction orders if we look at the four Geneva Conventions. If we read Article 146 of the four Geneva Conventions, 1949, it basically prohibits the forced transfers and the forced evictions of populations in war zones. What we had been seeing also in the past years in Sheikh Jarrah, in Khan al-Ahmar, in Ain Samia, in the Jordan Valley. This is a systematic colonial settler project that the Israeli military occupation is conducting on our grounds. It's being protected by the military occupation. Today, also the settlers are conducting this act of annexation, of terrorizing the Palestinians in an effort to force the Palestinians to leave the land, because they want to get rid of the Palestinians. They want to forcibly or voluntarily evict the Palestinians, then annex the land, confiscate it, and, deprive the Palestinians of the basic right of self-determination.
Yeah. Not only that, taking away our identity, our food, our clothing, even our music, right? A lot of traditions within the Palestinian community, they're attempting to erase that. And from my research, the framing of that is anti-Palestinianism, right? Anything that has Palestine in it, anything that suggests Palestine is not good. And they're trying to take that away from us.
Because it is the truth. It is the truth that exists and that they can find at the Holocaust Museum. That's why I'm telling you, they are waging a war not only against the Palestinian right to self-determination. They're not waging a war against Hamas, because they are destroying everything that is human for the Palestinians. So when we talk about targeting the Palestinian identity and Palestine and anything related to Palestine, whether it's cuisine, embroidery, tradition, culture, this is the basic definition of genocide, Iyad. If we look at the Genocide Convention and we look at Article 1 and 2 in the basic definition, it's basically the act of systematically destroying a group. And this, when they destroy a group systematically, they not only kill the people of that group, but also they try to destroy and eliminate every identity factor of that group, whether it is cultural, or religious. For example, the act of destroying the archive system in Gaza. That is the basic definition of trying to get rid and eliminate the Palestinian identity, to make it seem as if those people did not exist in that part of the world. This is a strategy that Israel is implementing. So the genocide is unfolding in Gaza, and not only against the Gaza people, but also against all the Palestinian people. If we look gradually at what had been happening on the Palestinian grounds. The fact that the Palestinians were gradually forced to leave the country. The Israelis are targeting more and more Palestinians, more Christians of Palestine as well. If we look at the percentages of the Christians who remained in Palestine, those were targeted. The women in Palestine are targeted. I want to name Shireen Abu Aqle, the fine journalist, the Christian, the woman, the very fine and anchored, reputable, just because she tried to document the truth about the Israeli occupation on the ground, just because she tried to share the truth with the world. The 6 human rights organizations, anybody, even myself, Iyad, recently, when I got invited to speak at Harvard, I automatically got labeled as being anti-Semitic. I automatically got labeled as being pro-Hamas. What we are saying on the ground is not a war against Hamas. I fully reject the framing of Israel-Hamas war, of Israel-Gaza war. This is a war, a systematic series of war crimes against the Palestinian right to self-determination, against the Palestinian identity, against the Palestinian basic right of freedom, liberation, dignity, and statehood, and struggle against the Israeli military occupation.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that invite to Harvard because, as I told you when we were exchanging messages, I studied that whole interview, and I think I watched it. I'm not being hyperbolic whatsoever, maybe 10 times. And I want to be clear. I don't know Tariq. I don't know anything about him. I'm sure he's a nice guy. But I feel like it was an unfair conversation. I think to an extent, I think he was forced to push you into a direction or sort of put you on the defensive. And it wasn't a pretty sight, not only as a Palestinian, but as a woman and as an academic. It was somewhat lazy of them, the way it was approached. And again, I don't know Tariq. I'm not calling him out. I want to be very clear. But my job here is to amplify you, and I feel an obligation to stand up for you here too.
Thank you very much. I don't want to personalize things, but for biased media in the US, just upon my invitation when that was announced, around 30 media outlets in the US automatically labeled me as anti-Semitic and pro-Hamas, etc., etc. Although if you look at my publications, my work, it's all anchored in peace, in diplomacy, in writings, in conferences, in conflict resolution. So for biased media to label me and take me out of context is simply, interpreted by bias, by unprofessionalism. But for the dean of Harvard to say, for example, that my tweets and the comments of journalism, that my comments were abhorrent, before inquiry and before, just listening or asking for my side of the story, was not acceptable from an academic perspective. Because in scholarship, in academia, inquiry is a basic requirement. We climb up the ladder of inference. It's an obligation on academics. We do investigations. That's the 101 for any researcher. We don't jump into the conclusions. We have to climb up that ladder of inference. So the dean did not criticize me. He did not give me the right to have my perspective heard. He judged me relying on one side of the story without any kind of inquiry, without any rigorous analysis, without any context, without hearing my narrative. And that is, the very basic difference between, being critical, which I would totally justify, and being judgmental, where you get out of the definition of being an academic in the first place. That's why when I went to Harvard, I accepted to go back into the framing and the contextualizing of explaining my statements, because I felt like the biased media in the US had totally taken me out of context, had jumped to the conclusions. They were basically trying to prove some opinions, to support certain narratives, but they were not doing their basic role of being journalists or of, investigating the truth. And the fact that Harvard's dean did the same by adopting the narrative without giving me the platform or without inquiring, that was totally, shocking for me as an academic. And I needed to go to Harvard and to remind the audience in Harvard that Harvard is anchored in the motto of veritas, of the truth, of facts, where universities are the higher education institutions that are supposed to produce knowledge and are supposed to counter the global challenges by introducing solutions that are based on truth and facts rather than mere opinions. That's why I tried my best to hold their a constructive, informed dialogue and conversation rather than to just argue and try to win arguments. I really wanted to address the audience in Harvard and to urge them to be more curious, when not only to adopt any narrative that they would hear, even if it is coming from American media, but for them to be reminded that they have brains and that they need to inquire and that they need to investigate and that they need to do their own research and readings, and that every story had two narratives, and there is an obligation on each and every one of us to read and to hear the two narratives before we judge or before we decide to support one side or the other. However, when it comes to responsible leadership, I don't think it's wise today for academics or for deans or for journalists to take sides. As tens of thousands of children are perishing under the Israeli military machine, it is not wise, it is not civilized, and it's not diplomatic or peaceful or human to stand at one side. But, I think the simple fact and the simple obligation on every human being is to stand for ceasefire, to stand for stopping those atrocities against humanity in 2024. Genocide should not be unfolding and documented as we witness, as we just speak about it. We should act upon that too. So the attack from Harvard, I think it was not personal, of course, but it was against anybody who would dare to criticize Israel, against anybody who would dare to speak bluntly and with power in support of the Palestinians' rights against the Israeli military occupation. What we had seen in Harvard did not start with my invitation, Ian. It started with the president of Harvard who was obliged to resign. So what we had seen in Harvard and in different campuses in the US is very alarming when it comes to freedom of speech, when it comes to the democracy, and when it comes to the role of universities in producing knowledge and in producing that important positive knowledge where we provoke the thinking of our students, where we rely on the production of knowledge and information to solve conflicts rather than to create more conflicts.
So I promise I'll stop talking about it, but I want to give you credit because you quite literally walked into the lion's den. You knew what you were walking into. And I think even somebody did some sort of form of protest and walked out to make a dramatic scene. And you just said, basically there's two doors, pick one kind of thing, which was brilliant. But they put you on the defensive on purpose. They wanted to put you on the defensive. They wanted to distract from the greater cause. And I think you did a phenomenal job in not letting that happen. And I think you did a great job in standing up for yourself. So I just want to make sure that's very clear to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But also, can I share that Tariq shared with me that he had received around 3,000 email petitions asking for my talk to be canceled. Mm-hmm. So from an empathetic perspective, if I want to practice empathy, he was put under a lot of pressure. And when we talk about 3,000 petitions in writing, and we talk about, those big donors, for example, for the school who threatened to withdraw their funding money, Tariq himself as a person and the Kennedy School was put under a lot of pressure. Yet, I salute him that he kept the talk. However, yes, he was put at the corner where he demonstrated that he had to save his career at Harvard by trying to be as tough as he could with me. However, he gave me the full platform to defend myself and to clarify and to contextualize as much as I wanted to. I had wished for that conversation to be more constructive and to be more, future-oriented, on a more thinking manner of how we could get out of that dilemma in the Middle East, in dealing with the conflict and the Gaza genocide, etc., etc. Yet we sank into the discussions of the tweets and the misread communication messages that I shared since the genocide. However, it was a good opportunity also to engage and to try to spread some knowledge about certain facts and truth that were totally distorted, that were totally spent. For example, the audience at Harvard thought, for example, that Israel totally withdrew from Gaza since Sharon dismantled the settlements in 2005. So I had the opportunity there to share that, yes, Sharon did dismantle the settlements in 2005, but it was Sharon's aide, Dov Weizglass, and Sharon who said it bluntly, that their dismantling of settlements, that their redeployment of settlers did not mean in any way that they seized control over the borders of Gaza, whether by land, by sea, or by air. Anything that had to go in or out of Gaza, had it been, materials, people, civilians, diplomats, needed to obtain a permit from the Israeli authorities if they wanted to go in or out of Gaza until October 6th. The permits were not obtained from Hamas, for example. No, it was the Israelis who were in full control and who are still in full control of the realities. So those basic reality details, I think, needed to be shared. For example, yes, they tried to spin everything and every argument over Hamas. They make us, feel like the Israeli military occupation never existed, and that this whole thing started with Hamas and with October 7th. And that was something that I had to reject and refuse at Harvard, and I had to clarify my opinions. So yes, my opinions and where I come from was seen as surprising to so many at the Harvard community. Yet I was also given the chance to freely share what I believed in as a Palestinian who is living under the Israeli military occupation and who blames the Israeli military occupation and the Israeli military machine for all the atrocities that humanity is suffering in the Middle East now.
Well, it was definitely a masterclass. I'm not going to lie. I sent that video to many people. I even had my wife watch it several times with me. And you did a phenomenal job. Again, one thing that was cited, if you're okay with us discussing this, was you had a play on words with one of your tweets of the former prime minister of Israel. Can you walk through that? Which there was a lot of humor there. It was a brilliant way of framing it. But obviously, as always, they're going to take it out of context.
Well, listen, if people look at it without contextualizing, it is provoking. It is provoking. I did share or I was inspired with what Golda Meir had said years ago when she basically told the Arabs that she might forgive us for killing their children, but she will not forgive us for making them kill our children.
Palestinian children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. She might forgive the Arabs for killing the Israeli people, in other words,
Yep.
but that she will not forgive them for for making them kill us. Mm-hmm. So I was inspired and I wanted to provoke the thinking of those people. And I said that I used her rationale, and I said we will never forgive the Israeli military wing government for making us take their elderly as hostages. I didn't even use the word killing as she did. I compared with the fact of taking hostages. Yet my words were too provocative to the Israeli audience or to the pro-Israeli audience. Yet for 1 second, I urge everybody to look at her tweets and to try to practice some empathy of how we as Palestinians and Arabs had been feeling and how we had been provoked for so many years. So why is it okay to accept and tolerate provocative lines and words coming from a certain side, but not from the other side? If we look at ourselves as human beings, as equally human beings, that it is about time in 2024 to apply international law, apply civilization, apply rhetoric on equal base on everybody. So if we want to hold anybody accountable for what they say, then it has to be on equal basis as well.
And it hasn't been, and it probably won't be for a very long time, if we're going to be honest about it.
It's not. However, that's why we say we are very challenged as people who speak the truth, as people who want to still advocate and to be vocal and not to tire. It's a long struggle. As I said, if we dare today to criticize Netanyahu, who is a right-wing extreme leader who has a coalition that is made of extremists, that is made of racists, that is made of terrorists, actually, that is made of settlers who are illegal personalities under international law. We criticize the Israeli military occupation. We criticize their violations, their continued violations of all international articles of, the Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention of the Child, the UN Security Council resolutions 242, 338, 253, 267, 298, 476, 478, 2334. The very, very recent UN Security Council resolution on ceasefire that was temporary, but it was binding. I have to remind the American audience here that when Biden or when the American officials came out and said it's not binding, they said nonsense. Every Security Council resolution is binding. The fact it's under Article 6 or under 7 does not undermine the fact that it is binding. However, its enforcement depends on the use of force versus using other means. But again, Israel had been violating all different resolutions. It had been violating all human international law or humanitarian law measures with every impunity possible. Israel had been committing war crimes which are documented. A genocide is unfolding. A case at the ICJ is ruling for the plausibility of a genocide, being committed by Israel. Yet nobody dares to hold Israel accountable in real life. And this is something that we need to just realize, accept, but never to accept and take for granted. We need to counter that argument. We need to speak up the truth. We need to continue to speak on behalf of justice and humanity, because we need to believe that justice must prevail one day. As long as we are resilient, we are Sumúd, then there must be a way out of this military occupation. Israel is turning into a pariah state where they are violating every single international law article, diplomatic law, UN resolutions. They are being shielded by the US, which provides the military and financial aid for the war crimes. Yet the whole world is learning today, with the help of the social media and with the smart devices that we hold in our hands that can transmit images in seconds to the whole world. The truth of Israel is being, shared with the world. This image and this stereotype that Netanyahu had tried to export to the world as Israel being the startup nation of the Middle East, that Israel is the democracy of the Middle East, had been totally destroyed now, because after 7 months on the genocide that has been taking place in Gaza, nobody needs to argue the fact and the truth about the brutal and heinous face of the criminal Israeli military occupation that is committing the ugliest genocide and humanity crimes in the 21st century.
And there's still this spin, and give me pushback if I'm wrong here, of course, you are the expert, that this is a religious issue, that this is a religious war, that this is a religious matter. Christian Palestinians are being impacted, are being killed as well.
This is another tactic or another strategy that the Israelis try to export to the world, that this is a religious conflict. As I said, our problem is not with the Jewish people. This needs to be made very clear. Judaism is a religion at the end of the day. There are Jewish Americans, Jewish French people, or Jewish Arabs. Our problem is with those who came, who forced us to leave our homes and property, who made us refugees, who occupied our lands, who are depriving us of the basic rights today. The fact that Israel is trying to take the region into a religious context is alarming. And what we had seen recently with Iran, for example, when they keep speaking about Hamas, it is the fig leaf. It is the fig leaf that they try to convince the Western audience with, because it's an easy sell. It's an easy sell of an idea if we link it to Daesh, ISIS, and Iran, which were portrayed and exported to the Western audience as if, the the evil or the terrorists by definition. However, what we are trying to share today, to communicate with the world, is the reality about what's happening on the ground. There is nothing that is religious. They are trying to abuse, manipulate the religion to make it and transform it into a religious conflict, where we all know that this is an existential conflict. This is a conflict over the land. This is a conflict against the Palestinians' right to self-determination. And it is basically the settler colonial project that is being, implemented on the Palestinian land. They want to seize all the land and control all the land. And if we remember when Netanyahu went to the UN back in September 2023, very recently, just before October 7th, he held that map in the UN headquarters in New York, from the river to the sea. He did not show any existence for any Palestinians. So this basic blunt message that Netanyahu had sent to the world in that international forum should not be tolerated in the first place. Those who still call for peace in the Middle East, for the two-state solution, should start by addressing Netanyahu, not only as a criminal who had been implementing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, not only against Netanyahu as a criminal who had been committing war crimes and destroying all the cultural, religious, healthcare system, medical system, depriving the Palestinian people. 2.3 million civilian Palestinians in Gaza. 70% of those are already refugees from 1948. And 50% of the population is children. Those don't even have any political views to start with. Those don't even understand the difference between Fatah or Hamas or Al-Jabha or Al-Jihad or any political faction. Netanyahu and his right-wing government is targeting every Palestinian, no matter what our ideology, no matter what our color, no matter what our gender, because their goal is to get rid of the Palestinian people, evict the Palestinian people, and annex the land. This is an issue and a conflict over the land. And let's not get confused between the terminologies here of conflict versus occupation. Because scientifically speaking and in theory, we do have the school of conflict resolution, yet this does not neglect the fact that on the ground, we suffer from an Israeli military occupation that must end. At the ICJ today, there is another case besides the genocide case that South Africa held against Israel, but also the Palestinians are holding another case at the ICJ for the legality of the Israeli military occupation and its repercussions. Those are the facts that we need to face in 2024. In 2024, we need to dare to speak the truth. It is not okay that Israel continues for more than 7 decades to export different narratives, to mislead the world, to spin the realities, and to distort the facts, while everything is documented and that the whole world is witnessing, yet Israel is enjoying every impunity possible. It's about time for accountability. It's about time for the truth to be shared boldly on every platform. And not only for the Palestinians to speak it, as we've seen. And here I want to salute all the people, in public diplomacy, the protesters, the demonstrations that we have seen in every city and every capital, in the US, in Europe, from London to France, to many different cities around the world. We had seen humanity speak. So there is a shift in that understanding, yet our path towards justice is long and we need not to tire.
I have a very difficult question to ask you, and you don't have to answer it for many reasons. But this is a question actually several people have asked me to ask you.
Oh.
If you were the president of Palestine, what would your first 3 to 5 steps be? And you'd get my vote. I know I don't get a vote technically, but you get my vote.
Thank you. It is an imaginary scenario to start with.
Yes.
Yet, as a responsible Palestinian leader, I am very much dedicated to bringing about change to my society, whether on the political level or the social level. The first thing any Palestinian president needs to do is to protect the Palestinian civilians, because that is the basic duty and ethical and legal responsibility of anybody who is elected as president, not only in Palestine, but all around the world. This should not be contested. So if the Palestinian president comes and says that I am here to protect the Palestinian civilians who are suffering from the Israeli settlers' attacks, or the Palestinian civilians who are being, attacked in their homes, their vehicles, who are deprived from the basic rights of mobility, the Palestinians who are being, extrajudicially killed and, murdered in the street, the Palestinians who are being detained, the children who are being blindfolded, or the women who are being deprived from the basic right of, reaching the hospital for delivery, the president must, for at least, protect the civilians on all those matters. And the president must be bold enough to stand in front of the whole world, including the Israeli military occupation, and say, don't dare come close to my people, because I were elected to protect those people. I'm not saying that the president should go and wage a war against Israel. I'm just saying that the president must ethically and legally be obliged to protect the Palestinian civilians. And I'm not here to criticize the existence reality, but I'm here to remind our president, and I'm here to remind the system here of what it means to be a president, what it means to be prime minister, what it means to be granted the vote and the trust of your own people. Is it only just to have somebody to call a president? No. Every citizen in Palestine who had voted is entitled to the services, is entitled to the protection. And this is the basic definition of what we teach in political science. Does not only apply to the Palestinians. This should not be contested. So I really urge any Palestinian president to come bold and to speak in front of the whole world and say, if the Israeli military occupation or if the Israeli settlers come close to my people, I am obliged to protect my people.
And you mentioned, I think, in that Harvard interview, because I just want to sort of piggyback off of that, you mentioned that you were sort of sending a message to your father's colleagues who are still alive to not forget the mission, or to not to forget the vision, right? Can you just unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yes. Besides, I want to go back to the president's, because you asked me for a couple of steps. One is to protect your civilians against the Israeli military occupation and settlers and any act of inhumanity. Second, in the Palestinian unique case, we immediately need to work towards our unity, towards reconciliation. Because I view the division between the Palestinian factions between Gaza and the West Bank, I view it as a catastrophe, really, to the Palestinian national cause. And if anything, then a top priority should be unity for the Palestinian people, should be the president's visit to Gaza immediately, because those 2.3 million civilians in Gaza who are suffering are Palestinian people who actually granted their votes and entrusted their votes to the president. So it should not be contested that the president must be in Gaza today. I know that we have the Israeli military occupation. I know that there are many barriers and challenges to what I am arguing now. But I would still urge the president to go into the Rafah crossing point and to try to show the world that he wants to be there for his own people. Because the Palestinian people at a certain moment in history where we feel helpless and we feel, that we lost faith in diplomacy. We lost faith in international law. We lost faith in the international system. We lost faith in the UN. We lost faith in the international humanitarian organizations, where nobody is capable in holding Israel accountable. Nobody is capable of, halting and stopping this genocide. So for the people who are the leaders and for the people of the leaders of the PLO who were committed to the peace track, my dad's colleagues who promised me and my generation statehood, sovereignty, liberation, freedom, and dignity. Unfortunately and sadly enough, Iyad, my own father had to leave this world without realizing his dreams of peace. He was a man of principles. He was a man who believed that he needed to defend the rights of his people through peaceful means, through dialogue and through diplomacy. Yet, unfortunately, and I feel so saddened for that fact, that my dad, who had dedicated all his life to this path of peaceful tools to bringing about a resolution and peaceful reality to the Middle East and to my generation and to the next generations, that he unfortunately had to leave without delivering his dream. So this is a reminder message, an alarming message to his peers to continue to work for that dedication, to continue to work towards that dream of peace for the people. It doesn't really take a genius to figure out that the two-state solution needs an imposed solution on the ground. Negotiations is only one peaceful tool to conflict resolution. Negotiations is not an end in itself. Unfortunately, the international community is dealing with negotiations today as if it is the goal, the end, that everybody is striving to bring the two parties back to the negotiating table. As a professor of conflict resolution, I would say no to negotiations now. I would say, as Borrell said of the EU, that the world needs to mobilize today for an imposed solution. Of course, when I say imposed solution, I say an imposed solution anchored in the international legitimacy of the UN resolutions and what the world had agreed for a peaceful solution for the Middle East. Yet the message is simple. If those who want to advocate for peace, they want to advocate for the two-state solution, they need to impose it by defining the border of the State of Israel, by ending the Israeli military occupation, by holding the Israelis accountable against their war crimes, and by granting the Palestinians their embedded rights. It is not a favor that the Palestinians are asking. When the Palestinians are calling for their right to self-determination, for their dignity, for their freedom, when they are demonstrating their right to struggle under the Israeli military occupation, this is a basic embedded right in all international laws and international systems.
And I do want to ask, and the question may be oversimplified, but you, as an academic, obviously, you provide so much great nuance. Why aren't the Arab countries supporting Palestine? I know that's broad. Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to judge and say that they are not supporting Palestine. Let's be frank to ourselves as Palestinians. If it is time we look at our reality as a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I want to take it from an academic perspective, and I want to share with you from a theoretical perspective the conflict mapping structures of any conflict. In conflict mapping, we look at the parties involved in any conflict. And when we look at the parties, we look at the primary parties. In this conflict, the primary parties are the Palestinians and the Israelis. Yes, the Arabs had a major role as secondary or third parties, yet taking out any Arab party from the context does not mean the end of this conflict. As long as the Palestinians and Israelis are the primary parties, then it is serving the needs of the Palestinians and the Israelis that will bring about peace and security to the region. That's why we saw the different normalization agreements, whether between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and the other countries that signed the Abraham Accords with Israel. This would never bring about peace to the region. Even if Saudi Arabia goes and finalizes a normalization agreement with Israel, because the primary parties to this conflict are the Palestinians and the Israelis, and unless the needs, and I reiterate, the needs and the rights of the Palestinian people and the Israeli people are met, no normalization agreement can bring about peace and security, not to the Israelis, not to the Palestinians, and not to anybody in the region. Yes, those countries can cooperate and they can reach the moon together, and they can bring about startup nations in the Middle East, and they can bring about the Silicon Valley to the Middle East. They can do many innovative or entrepreneurial projects. Yet, no peace and security could be guaranteed or sustained in the Middle East without the Palestinians' rights is realized on the ground. I wouldn't argue that the Arabs are not supporting the Palestinians, but I would argue that the Arab states, like any other state, like any other state in conduct of international relations and foreign policy, states are expected to serve their interests, their state's interests. And this is okay. If we understand political science, if we understand international relations and foreign policy, it should not be shameful for any country to pursue their interest in conducting their bilateral relations. However, as I am saying, that every country has the right to pursue its bilateral relations in reach of their national interest, this cannot come at the expense of the Palestinians' rights in any ways. So, for example, no Arab country can or has the right to say, for example, that they are signing this agreement or that they're normalizing with Israel to save the rights of the Palestinian people, or to stop annexation, for example, or to stop the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. Those are basic embedded rights to the Palestinian people. And there is an ethical and legal obligation on all state parties, not only the Arab world. The Arab world, based on the Arab League, yes, they do have a legal and ethical obligation. But also every member state in the international system, in the UN, in the Genocide Convention, every state has an ethical and legal obligation to bring about peace and security and to hold the criminals accountable, as we see the war crimes unfold and being documented in 2024 against the Palestinian people.
As I said, you were going to give the nuance, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The other question that somebody had asked me to ask you, and as you know, as you probably understand, I've done a lot of research. I've read almost everything you've written, quite literally, if that's possible. But there has, and I know you contributed to chapters and books to an extent too, right? The question is, when is a full book going to come out by Dr. Dalal?
It's in the making, actually. It's in
Is
the
it?
making, yes. And it's sad, but maybe I have to share with you that I've been trying to fetch a publisher, and it's been really a challenge. It's been really a big challenge. It's not something to hide that not many publishers would help advocate or encourage, Palestinian academics or Palestinian academics residing in Palestine to just publish with, reputable publishers. And I don't want to go with any publisher. I must be clear. I am seeking a reputable, big publisher, because I want to reach the international audience. I don't want my writings to only, get to my Arabic or Palestinian audience, with all the respect. But I think it's time we reach out to the other audiences, where we use the language that would resonate with the hearts and minds of the different conscious humans around the world, in telling our narrative and telling our stories, in sharing our narrative that is anchored in truth, in facts, and that comes from a first-hand experience from a Palestinian who was born, who grew up, and who chose to live in Palestine as part of my Sumúd, as part of my resistance, and as part of my service to the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian rights to self-determination and liberty and freedom.
If you have any names off the top of your head or any publishers, are you okay with naming them, and maybe this message will get to them specifically?
Yeah, I'm not fond of naming publishers now, but I would be happy to get in touch with those who will be interested in giving a platform to a Palestinian voice based on truth and facts.
Okay, no, fair enough. So just a few more questions. What do you want your legacy to be? Fast forward 50, 60, 70 years from now, what do you want your legacy to be?
When I say bringing about positive change into our reality, as a woman, I want to be remembered as a Palestinian woman who utilized the tools of diplomacy and education and writing and academia to bring about that change, and to leave that example for the girls' generations to come in Palestine, and for the youth as well, and for my kids, and to inspire the younger generation that they should be able to practice politics and to conduct politics in order for us to bring about the desired dreams, but not to continue to say that the U.S. decides the future of the Middle East and the U.S. decides the future for the Palestinians and the Israelis. Yes, the U.S. controls and might, steer how things go in our region by its biased, positions in alliance with the Israeli military regime. Yet, the individual role and the individual responsibility towards Palestine is the legacy that I want to be remembered. That I demonstrate how every individual not only on the collective level, teamwork is very important. And I'm not here undermining the role of collectiveness and, teams and community work. Yet, I want to be remembered for the Palestinian who had demonstrated the role of individuals in anchored responsibility to bring change to our societies, politically and socially, and on all different levels.
Great. And I always ask this of every guest. If you could send or give one message to your younger self, what would that be?
It's
For
good.
those of you who don't speak Arabic, when somebody says that usually means I don't know how to answer that one, kind of thing, right?
No, thank you for asking this question. I'm not a last minute person. And in our societies, and in this in 2024, people are tending to resort back to the messages of life is too short, and that we need to be more laid back and that we need to enjoy life. This is not Dalal Iriqat. I am somebody who is very much, a type A person who does not delay anything, not a last minute person who needs to get everything done. Where some people label me as the nagger, or somebody who keeps complaining, or sometimes they call me as the opposition, just because I want things to get done. So I go back to the young Dalal and I say I couldn't get rid of that identity. It's the same. However, I am still proud of it. It's not something that would bring me mental health, I have to admit. It's not something that would bring me a Zen state of mind. Yet, it is something that would make me distinguished in this life. And this is a message that I want to tell the younger generations. If you really want to be distinguished, if you really want to be a responsible leader in your community, regardless of your expertise, regardless of the field that you choose, you need to be a doer. You need not delay things to tomorrow. And you need to be that person who follows up on the details, even if the people around you might judge you. However, since you are results-oriented, then it's okay to continue to be determined and to continue with that, will.
That's an amazing message. I appreciate that. And one that I will share with my kids, as I'm sure you're sharing with your kids. So my last question, you mentioned earlier that your dad and his colleagues sort of gave a commitment to our generation, let's just say our generation, of a free Palestine, of a sovereign nation, so on and so forth. And they haven't really realized that yet. And unfortunately, he passed away before he was able to see that. What commitment do you give the next generation, our kids and our kids' kids?
The commitment is about the demonstration of the individual responsibility, of not tiring, of to continue to be vocal, to continue to serve my cause in every mean possible. Yet it's very, very exhausting and to live in Palestine and to continue to do that work, to continue to give those lectures and talks and briefings and repeating yourself. At a certain stage of life, you start to realize that, what am I getting, for example? However, the reminder that we need to continue, that I need not tire, I need to continue this mission is the main message that I will promise the generations. But it's not about the promises that we talk about. It's about the actions that we demonstrate. And this is for what we will be remembered for. So when my kids and the generations see, for example, that I have been writing on weekly basis, Iyad, for 8 years now with Al-Quds newspaper, on weekly basis voluntarily. And I'm not paid for all my writings. I do it because I believe in my individual responsibility in raising awareness on political matters and in trying to increase the knowledge of the Palestinian younger generations in politics, not only to increase their knowledge and awareness, but also to encourage them to practice and play better roles in politics. Given the daunting reality that we live under in the Palestinian politics, whether internally or because of the Israeli military occupation, it becomes easy for the younger generations to just abandon the roles from politics. And here I am demonstrating for women, for younger girls, and for the youth, that we should not tire, that we should continue to practice our roles and to embody that role model to our generations and for the younger generation, that we are capable to change our reality for the better as we live. And I really don't want to leave this world like my father did, while I am just promising and working hard. Things need to be done. We should not continue to say, yes, we can wait for decades and decades. It really does not take a genius if we have the will to bring about a positive, peaceful change to our reality.
Great. Thank you. Well, look, I know you're very busy. I appreciate this. This is a very important episode to me. You're an exemplar, if you will, of what this episode should look like, or this podcast in general should look like. So I do appreciate it. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Iyad. I just want to convey a last message to the American Palestinians who have all my respect. And I want to tell them that your roles matter. What you do matter. Your votes, your letters, your emails, your senators, your congressmen matter. However, Palestine needs you. If you do have the time, the capacity, the energy to come to Palestine, just don't hesitate. Don't waste the opportunity. Be in Palestine whenever you can. Palestine needs you.
Thank you so much, Dalal.
Thank you. Thank you very much for spreading the truth and trying to spread knowledge and information about the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian justice freedom.
Coming from you, that means a lot, but I also will listen to you and visit Palestine soon. So thanks.
Inshallah. Inshallah. You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
It's your home.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.